It is the fifth and final day of Singapore International Energy Week, which has basically taken place against the volatile backdrop of a crisis in Europe, the collapse of MF Global, as well as the uncertainty surrounding a new global climate treaty. For more, I'm joined by Simon Webb. He's the deputy editor of the Energy and Commodities in Asia. And of course, our regular columnist is Clyde Russell for Thomson Reuters. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. I mean, there's been a lot happening as the meetings have gone on, Simon. Is there a corresponding sense of gloom and doom, coming from delegates as well, you think?
Well, I think one of the interesting points that was raised on the first day was around the price of oil. It was something that came up again yesterday at the G20. The cost of oil at over $100 is weighing on many of the world's economies, and leaders around the world are concerned about it. It's been happening since February, and in the past, when the price has gone high, we've assumed, okay, it's not having much of an impact, people are getting used to it, but actually the IEA were at pains this week to say that $100 oil is hurting the economy. Then we had the mention, as I said, of the G20, the cost of fuel for big importing economies like India, it's a big deal. So I think, against that backdrop, the fact that MF Global has had so many troubles related to the euro debt crisis, all of those things combined, have definitely filtered into the meeting.
Clyde, your impressions, what really left an impression on you?
I think the main takeaway for me for this conference is that Asia's energy needs are pretty much insatiable. They're a voracious consumer of all forms of energy. They're seeking to gain as much supply as they can on virtually anything that you care to mention: oil, coal, gas, nuclear. All options are on the table for them, and they're trying to get as much energy as they possibly can. That also means that coal is going to be very popular in Asia going forward because it's the cheapest and most abundant in this region. And carbon emissions, very much a secondary concern here.
Simon, your sense of this, I mean, do you get the idea that countries in this part of the world are basically going to say, look, we'll consider clean sources of energy, but we'll look at everything because we basically need it? Is that what they're saying to you as well?
Absolutely. You've had both sides of the equation here. We've had some sort of positive comments, or at least pragmatic comments, around the use of nuclear power, which, just a few months ago were perhaps unthinkable in the wake of what happened in Japan. That's something that countries are looking at developing precisely because it's a relatively clean, at least in terms of carbon emissions, form of energy. So we've had that. On the other side, we've had people like the former IEA head, Nobuo Tanaka, talking about the need to develop everything, including unconventional resources, and some of those are emissions intensive. So all of the energy options need to be considered. I think that was fairly clear from the whole week. And I guess, I don't know, one of the interesting points perhaps is if you're a developing economy, can you really afford the energy sources that would allow you to have a clean energy economy?
Clyde, you wrote a column earlier this week, basically expressing hope that Asia might perhaps look at energy in a slightly different way. Do you see any chances of that happening? Anything from this meeting that gives you hope for that happening at all?
No, not really. That's perhaps the disappointing thing, is Asia's not really looking to innovate its energy use. It's looking to catch up to the West, not do things differently. I think they're trying to follow the industrialization process the West underwent without really recognizing that that's a terribly inefficient way to industrialize. The West did when energy costs were cheap. They are no longer cheap. Even coal is over $100 a ton. So I think I would have been happier to see a lot more innovative thinking about energy intensity and things like that. Instead, it seems to be the focus has really been on securing the supplies, making sure that they have enough supplies in order to fuel fairly rapid growth rates.
Now, Simon, I want to pick up on a point here about funding. We've interviewed a few people who basically are saying that funding, for these projects is not an issue. Is that the sense you get from the meetings you've attended and the newsmakers that you've spoken to over the course of the week as well?
Well, it very much depends on which country you're talking about. For example, China's spending huge, vast sums of money on developing clean energy. So clean energy projects are receiving funding. If you're talking about conventional energy projects, then we've had the CEO of Petrobras here probably embarking on one of the world's largest ever developments of the oil industry, who's also saying he's not having any trouble getting funding. So I think with the price of energy where it is, you know, the cost of financing can be covered. Financing is not an issue for most energy companies. However, there is a big issue around finding the funding for development of non-commercially proven technology, and that's an issue for the renewables sector, and we've seen that mentioned this week. And you do have to wonder how this technology is going to be is going to evolve. Is it going to rely on China? I mean, the head of the CEO of Shell talked about China being ahead of Europe on this because it is putting so much money in. Yet at the same time, there's a kind of trade dispute going on between China and the US because the US is accusing China of subsidizing the renewable energy sector. So there are issues around this and where the money's going to come from, and you know, those issues still need to be played out in the public arena.
Clyde, quickly your thoughts on the carbon tax law, which is due to be voted on next week in Australia. A good thing in general?
Well, that would very much depend where you sat on the side of that debate. What I can tell you is that insofar as limiting carbon emissions, it's very, very small. It's a spit in the bucket. Yes, you can say it's a start and that Australia is a very carbon-intensive economy and they are making steps towards it. It seems to me that the way the package has been structured is more of a welfare package where they are handing out lots of goodies to the majority of the population and making a small number of the population and a small number of polluting companies pay for it. It's maybe not the way I would have structured it, but it does show that there is at least some commitment in one of the world's most intense carbon polluting nations.
Okay, to wrap it up, I mean, where does what we've just talked about from both of you leave us in terms of the outlook for the climate treaty, the outlook for global emissions trading and so forth? Simon, very quickly.
Well, without an international protocol for carbon emissions, it's very, very difficult for the world to act together. If that were ever easy, it's even more difficult. So what we've seen developing are a whole range of sort of piecemeal initiatives in different states in the US, for example, or in Australia, or there are initiatives in India that look to limit carbon emissions, but there's nothing that brings countries together and forces governments to work with each other. And again, it was something that was raised this week by the CEO of Shell, the fact that if Europe is struggling to even deal with something as immediate and as pressing as its financial crisis, how is the world going to come together on something which for many people seems less tangible and perhaps less immediate, such as carbon emissions and greenhouse gas?
Clyde?
Well, I think if you look forward to the Durban summit later this month, you're not going to see anything big come out of that. I think realistically the most you could hope for is baby steps towards a global framework. It's going to take many, many years. It's going to be a long and torturous process. And that's where we are, basically, a fragmented world right up until the point that they can actually get something going. And that's, I would guess, at least a decade away.
Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today. And that's Clyde Russell. He's a columnist at Thomson Reuters. And Simon Webb is the Deputy Editor for Energy and Commodities here in Asia. I'm Arnold Gay at the Singapore International Energy Week for Reuters.